let's go ahead and finish this off with a post request for creating ratings for a particular setup. Now, this one's going to be a little trickier, so let's think it through. We want to give users the ability to rate another user's post, which means they aren't allowed to rate their own setup. And we also don't want them to be able to rate a setup twice. And at least in that first situation, where they aren't allowed to rate their own setup, that's probably a good situation, or like at least it's a nice fit for a permissions middleware. So let's go ahead and write one. In the middleware permissions.js function, file, we're going to create another function. And for the time being, I'm just going to copy this one and paste it here. Ooh, I did not do a good job copy pasting. Let's try that again. And in this case, I'm going to call this function something else. Now, what this function will be responsible for is making sure that the auth user is not the post owner. And so it's almost identical to the previous function, the previous middleware function, but in this case, we want to see if the post.userEmail is identical to the authenticated user's email. Let's throw a bad request error that says users are not allowed to rate their own posts. And if that's not the case, then we attach the post to res.locals and call next. So let's also export this permissions middleware. And then let's throw it into our new post request route. So down here, we're going to do almost the same thing. We want to make sure that a user is authenticated. And we also want to make sure that the auth user is not the post owner. Cool. Notice, by the way, that because we've added at least two middleware here, it's now collapsed onto multiple lines, which is a sign that we're keeping our routes pretty thin, which is a good thing. Now, all that's left to do is extract the post ID from the request parameters and get the user from res.locals. Then we'll create a new rating, create rating for post, and the rating will be, let's just say rec.body.rating, and we'll pass in the user and the post ID. And then if all goes well, we'll return res.status of 201 with the JSON response of the rating. Now, do we import that rating model up here? Yeah, we did already, so that's good to go. And this route is accounted for. It's similar to the patch one in that we have multiple middleware handling security and permissions. But otherwise, we're going to be using the rating model for this. And so now it's time to actually flesh out the rating model. We haven't done anything here yet, so this will be a little interesting. Let's first import an error. I'm actually just going to copy paste it from the permissions middleware here. Let's grab that and paste it below. And we're only going to need the bad request error. Now, all we're going to do here is first just make sure that the rating is valid. So we're going to say if not number rating, if they didn't send us a number, or if the rating they sent us is not a valid number, or the rating they sent us is less than or equal to 0, is a number less than or equal to 0, or the rating they sent us is a number that is greater than 10, let's throw a new bad request error that says invalid rating provided, must be an integer between 1 and 10. Now, the other situation that we want to account for is if the user has already added a rating for this post. So we'll say const existing rating equals await rating dot fetch rating for post by user. I love that name. It's so long and descriptive. And we'll pass in the user and the post ID. Now, we haven't implemented that yet, but we will. And if that user has already created a rating, let's throw a new bad request error and say users aren't allowed to leave multiple ratings for a single post. Then, if all goes well, we'll actually create that new rating. So we will insert into ratings the rating, user ID, post ID, and we will take the values of whatever rating is passed in here, followed by a subquery selecting the ID from the users where the email is equal to whatever the user.email is going to be, and the post ID. Then we will just return the rating, user ID, post ID, created at. And we can alias them, but I don't think we need to. Then let's also just pass in the bind parameters and return results.rows 0. Cool. Now all we need to do is implement this fetch users ratings of a post if one exists function type thing. So we'll say const results equals await db.query, and we will select, I don't like that, get out of my face, select rating, user ID, post ID, created at, from ratings, where user ID is equal to, and we will also use a subquery here, like ID from users, where email equals 1. And post ID is equal to yes. So we have two conditions in the where clause here. We want to make sure that we're looking for any rating where the user posted it, and it's for this exact post. And if that exists, we will return that rating. Now, we could have definitely extracted this logic into its own permissions function. Honestly, like right here, all of this feels a lot like a permissions. But that would be totally fine. In fact, it'd probably be preferred, but it's nice to be able to show both approaches and realize they're accomplishing the same goal in different ways. Now we can just actually, let's test them out. Might as well, right? So if we have a rating here, let's go ahead and if we have a post here, and this is our post, we know we cannot create a rating for that as long as our permissions module is working. So let's post to ratings, and let's try to do that. Let's give it a 10 for our own post. Let's send it. And of course, let's start our server again. And let's send it again. Users are not allowed to rate their own posts. Looks like it worked. That's great. Now, let's change users and try that again. And would you look at that? This post has now been rated 10 by the first user. The post of the second user has now been rated 10. So let's actually try and do that again to make sure, hey, can we rate this post twice? Users aren't allowed to leave, I spelled that wrong, cool, multiple ratings for a single post. Boom. And look at that. Our permissions are working, our checks are working, and it seems like everything's in place, but there is one thing we should probably tidy up. Let's look again at our post queries, because if we're querying posts, we want to know what their ratings are, right? So we probably want to get like, I don't know, for each of these here, we want to get like an average rating score, maybe all the ratings that have been passed to it. Let's do both of those, might as well. But that means we'll have to update these functions a little bit. So let's go in here and let's do two things. First, we want to join, and let's actually just do this. Let's say left join users, and we'll left join the ratings as are on r.post ID is equal to the post ID. Now, why are we doing this? We want to join all the ratings on the posts, even if posts don't have any ratings. So we're using this left join here to make sure that we get all the posts, even the ones that have 0 ratings. That's why we're using this left join syntax here. Now we're joining all of these ratings, which means we're going to have multiple rows for a single post. So we'll have to group that. We'll have to group the results by the post.id, and because this user email is also unique, we'll just do it by that user email. Now doing that means we can run some aggregation functions on it. So we can say average r.rating as rating, and count r.rating as total ratings. And we can pretty much do that exact same thing here. We can take almost everything that's identical here. Let's just use left join. And except we don't want to, I think actually, and all we need to do is just group it, right? Group by post.id and the user.email. And I think that should work. Maybe. We're about to find out in a second, I guess. So let's check it out. These queries have gotten like a little more complicated, which is why we saved them to last, but there's really not that much to them. It's just some aggregations and some grouping, which if you're not familiar with SQL, I truly recommend you check out because they can be super powerful. But let's test them out. Let's get all the posts. Cool, seems to be working, and we have the rating here and the total ratings for this post. And this one has 0, and the rating is null. Now, if we create another user, with email of u@u.u, and the password is u, and I were to evaluate that same post so that we have multiple ratings for a single post, and let's turn this one off and just check let's get all the posts really quickly again so we know which one is the one we evaluated. Cool, we rated number 2, right? So let's add another rating to number 2. Let's say posts/2/ratings, and we'll make a post request to it, and we'll give it a rating of 7. And send that request. Looks like it worked. Let's get all the posts again. Let's just get the post number 2 first. Ah, fantastic, it worked. And we have our average rating of 8.5 and a total ratings of 2. If we get all the posts, works like a charm. And look at that. We've got a really solid backend up and running, and everything is working like we wanted to. We couldn't ask for much more. How cool is that? Let's go ahead and commit everything, since we have something working at the moment. Added rating endpoints, looks good. Now, wouldn't this be nice if we could see it all hooked up to a working React front end? Well, we can, but it's probably not worth it to build the whole thing from scratch. Fortunately, I've prepared a small starter React app so we can see how to integrate everything we built into a full Pern stack application. And it'll also be a good chance to show how to store tokens client side and make sure we send authenticated requests from React. So that's it for the back end, but we'll get into the front end next.